This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Hannah Crepeau, and I am the Content Marketing Manager at Certiport. We're so happy to have everyone joining us for our third and final CSB Academy webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important subject, the demand for communication skills in the workplace. And we have two incredible panelists that are joining us. Our first panelist is Tasha Scott. Tasha is a Global Talent Acquisition Manager and Manager for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program at Pearson. In her Global Talent Acquisition Management position, she leads and learns from 20 plus amazing recruiters and talent professionals in Sri Lanka, India, Greater China, South Africa, Australia, and the UK. Tasha has a master's degree in Human Resources Management from Lindenwood University. Our second panelist is Scott Chabot. Scott is an HR business partner at Pearson and has been with Pearson for over 20 years. Scott has responsibility for supporting employees throughout the employment life cycle. This includes onboarding, training, employee relations, and performance management. Scott has a degree in sociology from St. Cloud State University, a professional in human resources certification, and is a certified change management practitioner. We're so privileged to have these amazing HR representatives with us today. So before we dive into the questions that I have, Tasha and Scott, I wanted to give you both a chance to introduce yourself. So Tasha, can we go ahead and start with you?
Yeah, sure. You said a lot of it, but hi, everyone. Nice to meet you virtually. I am Tasha. I've been with Pearson going on 10 months now. But been in the HR talent acquisition DEI space for about 10, 11 years now. I'm in the Midwest, so I sit in St. Louis, but most of my life I lived in Philadelphia, and then I lived in DC. I think I saw someone in the chat from DC, so hey. So yeah, I spanned across a couple of regions in the US, and now a lot of my people and colleagues that I work with day to day are overseas. So quite a diverse background.
Awesome, wonderful. And Scott, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Scott Chabot, good to be here with you today. As you've heard, I've also worked with Tasha at Pearson and been a business partner here for 20 plus years. I guess today I am sitting in very cold weather in Minnesota, but you know, I've been here my whole life, so I shouldn't be shocked. I think one of the interesting things that I've been coming in touch with and contact with the last couple of years is just our changing work environment, changing workforce needs. So while I support across the employee life cycle with all the things that Hannah mentioned, it's taken on a little bit different flavor as we work more remotely and we have different things to consider in the workplace. So good to be with you today and good to be speaking with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And just to kick us off, I wanted to dive right into our conversation. We talked a little bit yesterday as we were preparing for this webinar about the nature of communication. And you talked, Scott, about how a lot of that has changed as we've gone into a digital workplace. But we know that both of you do a lot of work with applicants. And so communication skills have to start from that very first interaction. So Tasha, we'll start with you. What are some communication tips that our educators should be sharing with their students as they prepare to enter the workforce and apply for jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, you know, having some confidence coming into an interview is always key. It's so hard. And I remember being there, even like when I was looking to apply for different positions, when I was looking before I got this job, it's really intimidating. But I think just understanding your capabilities as a person and being able to speak to that, being able to step in, you don't know. So it's okay. I think a lot of us interviewers know that we're asking questions sometimes that we don't expect the applicant to know or know how to do, but it's okay to step into ambiguity and talk about maybe what you would have done in that situation. You know, so the person interviewing you can get an idea of like what your thought process is, you know, in that space. Come prepared to an interview. That's a big one. Do not wing it. That is not a good idea. Give clear examples. I think a lot of leaders, including myself, we see the resume, right? So we can understand from a basic qualification standpoint that you got to this point, but like, tell me the story of how you've done some of those things on the resume. So being able to tell your story and your brand in a confident manner that's clear and that's prepared, I think would be really helpful for applicants.
I love that you talked about having a brand, right? Because in today's world with the digital footprint and things, we know that when you walk into the interviewer might already know a little bit about you. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was social media. Did you want to touch on that a little bit as well?
Yeah, so I would say tell your students to keep it private or just like forego it. I mean, LinkedIn is a necessary tool. So LinkedIn is great. There's a organization we partner with called My G Works that's specifically for LGBTQIA plus and allies. It's a great network to go on from a professional lens. I personally myself have had to bypass people with unfavorable Facebook or social media posts and the things that they have said, even though on paper they look good. The objective, and I think Scott can speak to this as well, is that your company probably has some missions, visions, purpose, values, something like that. And if your actions or the things you say are counterproductive to that, even though you may be really good on paper, that's probably going to be a pass for us.
I love that, being able to be aware of communication, not just within the interview, but in their other outlets as well. Scott, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I'll second that for sure in terms of social media. I know it's sort of a necessary, we want to stay in touch with friends and family. We can argue whether or not employers should have visibility into that, but just making sure students understand the permanency of what's out there and that people do have access to it, and maybe even taking some time prior to actively engaging, whether it's applying for a college or whether it's applying for a role that's going to be your first professional position or start your career. You want to have an idea of what's out there and maybe get those things in order a little bit, and maybe think about being mindful about what you're posting. Maybe you want to be posting things more relevant to your career or just things like that. So it is a good thing to be aware of for sure.
I love that. And one of the things, Tasha, you specifically mentioned yesterday is after the interview, it's important to do some follow-up work. So what does that typically look like in your mind?
Yeah, I think nowadays it's a quick connection on LinkedIn. I love when the candidates that I'm interviewing or talking to want to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's a very easy way to find commonalities in some of the things that you share. Not that that's going to get you the job, but it just makes the conversation a little bit easier, I think, for both people to say, hey, we went to the same school, or we support the same organization, or I have a master's degree too. So yeah, I would say that connection, or send like a quick follow-up email after the interview. I would say probably no more than 24 to 48 hours, because after that you kind of get too far out from the process. But just letting the person know that you're interested in the position, and just dropping a line and letting them know, hey, that I'm here. Just that little bit of detail goes a long way for us.
Scott, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that too?
I think it's interesting. It seems like something where there's this perception that that's just kind of fallen out of favor, or it's sort of a old school or something. And actually, it happens so infrequently now that I can guarantee you that managers and those involved in the hiring process take notice. So you can certainly give your students a leg up by just saying, hey, I'm going to teach you this really cool old school thing. It's called a thank you letter. It's great. So I encourage that definitely.
Yeah, a super basic skill, right? But not very many people use that type of exercise anymore. So I love the idea of something vintage, we could say, coming back and making you stand out. One thing I wanted to talk about as well is, we know communication from that very first interaction, first impressions make such a difference, but it's also such an important piece of our day-to-day interactions in the workplace. And so, Scott, you have a lot of experience with working with employees and maybe helping people bridge that communication barrier. We'll put it like that. So what are some of the main barriers that you come across when you're working with employees here at Pearson?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. I think for me, again, a lot of times we're in we have so many distractions, so many things vying for our attention. And so I think, again, students making that transition, this can be particularly a challenge for them in terms of, putting that phone aside, or silencing that phone in meetings or in an interview or something like that. Again, really simple things, but it will help you be more engaged. Trying to do as much listening as talking, trying to come prepared with questions, trying to show that interest and engagement in the person across from you're communicating with, or the room you're communicating with. Not just sort of, and that's tough. That's a tough one, I think, to teach students, because again, we're saying come prepared and we're asking them to think through and do all these things. But I think at the end of the day, they have to be able to listen. They have to be engaged. They have to be asking follow-up questions. I think those are all things that show the person you're communicating with that you're interested and that you're taking the conversation seriously. So I think I would start there.
Yeah, just some really basic eye contact, showing that you're listening, the active listening piece, right? Being able to follow up with questions. That's wonderful. Yeah. Tasha, did you have anything else that you would want to add to that, or any thoughts about communication once people are on the job?
Yeah, so not communicating, it may sound strange, but I don't feel like people communicate enough. Not just when it comes to questions. We have a lot of weird acronyms in Pearson. So I know when I first started, and this is just not myself, like you're in a meeting and people are saying things and you're like, yeah, and then you're pinging someone like, what is this? Like, when you can just speak up and ask, about it, it's okay. Like, ask those questions. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. Know your audience, though, I would say for sure, who you're talking to, how you're talking to them. And from an inclusive lens, I would definitely think and say to expand how you're communicating. So don't just pick email as your choice of communicating. Some people like to communicate over the phone. I like a mix of both. If it's urgent, I like to get pinged. Not everyone is just long emails. Some people like bullet points. Some people resonate with a PowerPoint or a picture or something like that, which really helps. So not to assume that everyone communicates in the same style. That is helpful, I would say as well.
I like that, being able to kind of break down the walls of what we're supposed to know and how we're supposed to communicate, and getting it on kind of a one-to-one level. So you mentioned, Tasha, multiple tools that we use, and we all balance these in the workplace. Email, IM, people call you on the phone. So we'll start with kind of the digital platforms with email and IM. What are some of the communication issues that you've noticed, and Scott, you can answer this as well, that are common within those digital forms of communication?
Yeah, so IM is very quick and fast, in my opinion. So that's more of like an urgent thing or a very quick note. So using IMs as a form to spill out a 4-page letter is not going to be appropriate because you can't get to it. I would say emails or on a phone call would probably be better for that. I think slowing down, making sure you're reading an email, not taking your aggression out in email. I can't tell you how many times, you do this probably all the time, Scott, where you have to tell the person like, let's just take this off email, because sometimes it can get lost in translation what you're trying to say. We're human, so we all get frustrated. But we want to make sure at the end of the day, we're working towards the same goal. So if you have a conversation that you feel yourself getting a little bit anxious, angry, or indifferent, and you think maybe the other person might feel that way too, it is so much easier to pick up the phone call. I have made that mistake over and over again. So please tell your students that it is a mistake that's happened. It is one that I try to stay away from, but it definitely does happen, and it definitely makes a difference to get that one-on-one connection sometimes.
Definitely. I will add that, taking the time to ask how people prefer to be communicated with. Again, it's about sort of avoiding those assumptions. So we all sort of have, we come into the workplace and we have access to all these similar tool sets that are at our disposal, but some people may be more comfortable, with a phone call. Some people may be more comfortable with email. How do people prefer to be communicated with? I think I always appreciate when someone reaches out to me and they ask me, if it's an instant message, and they ask, is it okay? Do you have a minute? Is it okay if I ask you a question? Instead of just kind of what can tend to happen is people just lob questions out there. The next thing you know, you look away for 5 minutes, you come back and you've got, 10 pretty serious conversations started that you didn't even know you were in. So that would be sort of an ideal thing, but just to keep in mind, not everyone is comfortable across all channels, culturally, or I would say, depending on, various age demographics and different things like that. Sometimes people aren't as comfortable with it, or just being aware of using maybe more slang language, or as you were saying, like abbreviations, things like that. Just making sure, people really understand what you're saying. It is really easy to take things out of context as well. So really kind of learning when the appropriate times would be to use certain types of communication. I think it's important.
I appreciate
I would probably,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna probably add one more thing in, which I learned, is to be very gracious to time zones, right? So that's something I did not have to speak to previously in past jobs. I didn't manage that many international markets, but being in an international company, I have to be aware of when I'm setting my meetings and times, and when I'm chatting with people, and making sure I'm not putting them in a position where it's taking away time for their family, or it's not comfortable for them. So I agree with Scott when he said, ask them how to communicate, but also when to make sure you're trying to land within their comfort zone.
Those are things I think that most students probably haven't had to balance, right? So it's a new frame of mind that they kind of have to think through. And Scott, I really appreciate that you called out age demographic and how that makes a difference with how people prefer to be communicated. Because I'm thinking, when I was younger, we had a home phone. I don't know how many people who are younger or, graduating from high school and college right now have grown up with a home phone, but being able to communicate more over the phone and kind of what that looks like. I think practicing phone etiquette is something that's, I'm sure, not as popular anymore. So have you found that there are issues with people communicating in person or over the phone, or is that much less likely to happen than when it's digital communication?
I can definitely say that students sort of newly out of school, I feel like, are much less interested in picking up the phone and do not see the value in that. So it is that can be challenging at times. So, but I think, just so helping them to understand that they might need to practice that, or even just the idea of being on a video call or something like this.
Yeah.
I still have employees, so being with the company for a long time, working with a lot of folks in Pearson, thankfully, people stick around for a while, usually. This has been a transition for a lot of folks, to get to this point even. And so appreciating that not everyone has necessarily done that, or again, going back to those assumptions, if you're asking somebody to do a video presentation or be on a video call, or trying to remind folks of what the functionality is if you're having to join and do those things. But yes, to your point, I definitely see people more apt to want to, I would say, those more recently out of school or maybe younger, to want to be more apt to send a quick Slack or an IM or something like that, some other sort of instant message avenue.
Yeah, I like that. And Tasha, I wanted to get your thoughts as well. If we have students who go on to work with international employees at large corporations, do you find that there's communication preferences that are different across different regions?
So we have predominantly English speaking individuals. As far as applicants, we do ask for the most part that our applicants can speak some level of English, especially in like client facing or business facing different positions. So, most people just use Zoom, but I know we do try to make communications that come out from Pearson in multiple languages. So it's not just English dominant. If this is recorded, I think it can be recorded back where it can be in a different language. So, there's different things that we try to do from a cultural perspective, but overall, I think most people tend to just use Zoom, and it seems to be really easy. They don't have to use their personal phone. I think for the fun part, like I have some of my teams on WhatsApp, so we go outside of the Zoom and your emails and stuff like that, and we'll just send each other gifts, and like those are like pictures and stuff like that. It's fun, right? So we don't do it all on the work stuff. We have our own private little thing where we share that.
Yeah, being able to balance fun communication, tipping that into the mix as well. Yeah. So thinking about what communication is all about, hopefully it's about coming together and sharing a common goal and a common mission. So you talked about bringing together people from other parts of the world that you work with. And I know that at the end of the day, that's what communication is all about. It's about bringing people together. And you mentioned, Tasha, your work with the diversity, equity, and inclusion team here at Pearson. So I wanted to talk a little bit more, if we could, about what role do we feel like diversity plays in communication? What do teachers need to be aware of if they work in maybe a more diverse classroom?
Yeah. So very basic things. So when we talked about assuming, don't assume anything, right? Like assume that everyone communicates in a different way, right? So be able to have different lessons in different manners, whether that's textbook, video, short videos, whatever it may be. I think those can be really helpful, having those different lines of communications and not assuming. We all have different lived experiences. So some of our terms do not translate over across cultures. So just be careful and mindful of the things that you're saying and how you're saying them. And, feel comfortable with saying, oh, I apologize, or I didn't mean that. I think it's really hard because we are human. So we will make mistakes, but step into those mistakes and apologize if that happens to come up. Anything that's racially or sexually insensitive and things like that, stay completely away from those, obviously. Be open to time zones. Like I said, like that's really helpful for people in different cultures. And I think really just get to learn people, ask people questions, get to know them. Most of the barriers, I think, are when people just stay siloed in themselves and they don't get to learn who other people are. And, we have a robust team of over 20,000 employees in Pearson. And, I think UK, US, and India are where they sit, but have most people talk to someone from India and had a conversation about their culture, who they are, what their role is in Pearson and how that plays a part in our day to day. So yeah, I would say that's some things.
Awesome. I love that. Scott, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think that's great. I think that I always think of, trying to ask again more open-ended questions. And again, I know it sounds like we're saying assumptions a lot, but that's one of the biggest things as we work together to navigate diversity in different ways in the workplace. I think, for example, not saying something like, oh, are you here because of this, versus saying, oh, what brings you to this meeting today, or what makes you interested in this? Or it's really subtle, but turning some of those things around into a question and leaving it open. And then from there, realizing, oh, okay, that's not what I was thinking. That was real. I'm really glad I asked that question, or, and using that to lead to hopefully a better and more positive conversation. I can't tell you how often that's I've seen that help, or it's something that I can oftentimes see as an issue where I may be brought in to help coach somebody or something like that, to say, look, if you just kind of rephrase something in a question at times, that'll just make all the difference.
Yeah, being open and being okay with not knowing things, right? Like Tasha mentioned, we all make mistakes, and being okay with doing that and being able to give yourself and others grace as we kind of all grow and progress together. And one of the things, Tasha, that I love that you mentioned yesterday is that we all come from different life circumstances, and that might mean that our network or our group of people that we work with looks very different from others. So I think one of the things that you talked about yesterday was how teachers can really help students build their network to be able to connect them with people and professionals that will be helpful for them. So is there anything else in addition to that in your mind that teachers can do to help students of color or those in maybe more marginalized groups help them to communicate more effectively as they transition out of school and into the workforce?
So I think every interview is an opportunity to network. And I think it's very easy to see every interview very tactically. Like I do my interview, they like me or they don't. But if you use that as an opportunity to collect, I'm a people collector, so I like to get people's names and find them on LinkedIn. And if I have a question, reach out to them and build those relationships. And sometimes those relationships are the ones that get you your job. Half of the jobs that I've had in my career thus far have been because I knew someone that knew someone, and they were like, oh, reach out to Tasha. And most of the time that person, I knew that person, I didn't know that person, but like, you know, that middle person knew me. And so that was enough to make that slight connection at some point. So I would say definitely try to change that mindset of this being just an interview to this being an opportunity. So take that opportunity and take it, you know, and utilize it and do whatever you can to get to where you need to be. There's plenty of students that have reached out to me on LinkedIn and are like, hey, can I just send you my resume? And I'm like, sure. You know, whether or not I have a position or not, it kind of stays on your mind a little bit. And then if I hear if someone has a position open, I'm like, wait a minute, I think so-and-so just reached out to me. Hannah sent me her resume. She'd be really great for this. Why don't you give her a look? Those little things are so big. So get your students network as soon and as often as you can and let them see that interview as an opportunity.
I love that. People collecting too. I haven't heard that phrase. I think that's awesome.
It sounds a little weird, but like it's not.
But it makes sense, right? Being able to, because that's what networking is all about. It's collecting people to put into your corner who you can help, and then in turn can help you as you know, move into different circles and things like that. So I love that idea. Scott, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Networking, what other ways do you think we can help these students?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. You know, obviously people tend to think of networking as primarily, you know, when you're, you know, seeking a job or between jobs or something like that. But I would say one of the more powerful things someone can do in the workplace is build your network within the job, within the workplace as well. Especially for, you know, a less experienced person starting off their career, you know, for the first time. Looking for those people you can surround yourself with that maybe you can use actually to practice some communication things with, or, you know, bounce a presentation off of, proof an email, use as a sounding board for an idea that you might have, and just help, you know, you learn and grow as you kind of go through your career. You know, I think that's one of the interesting things is, you know, I think about the challenges that this workforce faces that maybe my parents' generation didn't face as much. Is just it's less likely you're going to join a company and maybe stay with the same job or even the same career, and you may change multiple times. And so continually building that network of people to help you grow and learn and be flexible and make changes as you navigate, I think is really important.
Yeah, we had a webinar a couple months back about IT jobs specifically, but we talked about, you know, long gone are the days where you graduate, get a job, and that's the thing that you do for the rest of your career. I mean, technology and the pandemic, there's so many external factors that make it so a lot about our workday has changed. So I think that that's particularly relevant. The last question I wanted to ask before we jump into some of the Q&A or the chat is, what advice would you give our educators who are listening and hoping to prepare their students to be effective workplace communicators? What's your punchline, your one piece of advice that you would share with them?
Oh, that's hard. Just one piece. There's so much, but
I mean, if you want to share more than one, we're not bound by these rules. If you have plenty you want to share, we're open to that too.
I think that thinking when I was younger, when I graduated my bachelor's degree and just, you know, starting, one thing that I wish I had was people that told me the reality of what was happening in the world and how that reflected in the workplace. So what that meant really to me. And so I think that just going and applying to a couple jobs here and there is not really going to hit the mark. I think you really have to do your due diligence now and look at the different companies, what they stand for, you know, vision, purpose, DEI goals, things like that. How are they showing up? What does this really mean to me? Interviews can be hard. You're not going to get the first job. Probably if you do, that's great, but that's unrealistic to think that that's going to happen. It could take some time. So prepare yourself mentally for that roller coaster of a ride. But looking for a job is like a job in itself. So just have that mindset of the reality of what it is. It can be really fun process. It can be a hard process, but it is work to find a job.
The job of finding the job that no one tells you that you're going to get when you come out of college, right? Scott, anything else that you wanted to add?
I would just say, I was going to jokingly say, take a phone call once in a while, or force yourself to go through the actual checkout line where there's someone there, to help you do that in person. It's hard because it's convenience versus, functionality, I guess, or you know what I'm saying. I think it's one of the best things you can do is just try to continue to impart that on your students. Just communication is going to continue to be a huge differentiator in the workplace. As more and more things become automated or there's some sort of AI involved, strong communication skills, you can't place a value on it, really, I think, and especially for those that are looking to level up and they really want to grow and climb that ladder. Being a strong communicator and practicing it and forcing yourself to practice it, I think is going to be so beneficial to your students. So thanks for doing what you do. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we all do. Thank you. I think that that's particularly relevant. We know teachers are doing a lot to help these students, especially in these times. So we really appreciate that. Okay, so we had one question in particular that I wanted to address and thought was super interesting. Is it possible to over communicate in a professional environment?
Yes. Yes, I personally find myself repeating, and it's not because I don't know why I do it sometimes, but I over communicate in that just to reiterate the point to make sure it gets across. So I think that's some type of HR tactic that I probably picked up a long time ago. But yes, you can over communicate in an email. There's sometimes people send me long paragraphs, and Scott can probably say the same thing too. And you're just like, what are we talking about here? And that can be off-putting sometimes, and it misses the mark a little bit. Yeah, I think you want to do, Scott talked about active listening. So I think you want to do that. I think sometimes over communications mean you didn't hear what was going on sometimes. Yep. So I think active listening and proofreading yourself before you send an email or make that phone call, or prefacing hey, sometimes I just need to vent, or this is going to be word vomit coming at you, but just so you know, this is what this is going to look like here. To give the person the heads up of what's coming. So absolutely, I have been guilty of that as well.
Scott, any thoughts that you wanted to share for that?
I agree. It's an interesting question for me because, after 20 years of surveys to employees will always say the company can never communicate too much. And that's something that every company faces, that, they want more top-down communication. But in terms of communication day-to-day across your peers or with your manager, it really depends. I think it really goes back to being willing to ask the question. From manager to manager, you might have some managers that want to meet with you weekly, or they want some sort of a weekly update in a written format from you, and others that just say, ping me if something happens. Otherwise, if I don't hear from you, it's a good thing, right? So it's really, I think, again, understanding who your audience is, understanding what level you're communicating with. If a senior leader pings you to ask a question, they probably are looking for a really more specific answer. They don't have time to scroll through a page of response. So in those situations, again, just kind of knowing who's going to use this, how are they going to use the information, and being mindful of that. You can always, offer up to ping them via call to share more or do something more, but not being afraid to keep it concise. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, as I try to keep it concise.
Yeah. I like that because I know that oftentimes, especially in high school and early college, when we have assignments that are being graded on how long they are, and so you have students going back in and adding more just because they haven't met the page requirement, I feel like the business world is the exact opposite of that. It's how short can you make it to communicate the point without having to have someone read too much? So being able to have students communicate effectively in long and short format, I think that that's super important. Love that. So we had another question that I will go ahead and answer. So there was a question about, is there any material or additional information that people can get based on this topic? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to go ahead and drop into the chat some resources that we have on the Certiport blog about communication and about how you can help students prepare for communicating in the workplace. So I just dropped that into the chat. It looks like we are wrapping up a little bit early. So I wanted to give Tasha Scott, if you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share before we close out.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh, please, we're so grateful for you.
Yeah, listen to your students. They're a wealth of information. Learning goes both ways. So as you're learning to communicate with them and they're learning to communicate with you, be dual and listening to that. The generation coming into the workforce is amazing. And they have so many skills. And so I think we're super excited to see what they can do. And they come in at a time where even though the market is so tight, I think companies will have to adapt to training more, which means we're going to be open to way more people, which is great for diversity, for students coming in. So it is a really good time. So yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Scott, any thoughts from you before we close?
I would just say, tell your students what you're teaching them is the most valuable thing they could possibly learn. So pay attention. No, I really do believe that it's time and time again, just about any situation that I am asked to, help be involved with, or, as I say, help coach, or if there's a performance management thing that might come up with an employee, I would say 9 times out of 10, some sort of communication piece is going to be part of that, about that solving it or helping improve. So I just think it's so important. And I appreciate, again, as Tasha said, I appreciate being a part of the call today.
Well, thank you both. And I'll just echo what was dropped into the chat. This was a great session, and we love that you guys were able to be a part of this series. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your counsel with us and with our educators. We know that the work that they do is so important. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. We'll be sending out the recording in the next 24 hours. So we appreciate you spending your afternoon with us. Thank you.